Thank you, Wolfgang. I'll try to speak slower than I normally do for translation. We're here now in Dusseldorf, and the United Nations Climate Summit is beginning next week. And we're going to have a lot of fun here. We come every year. My PowerPoint works on the computer, but it doesn't seem to be working on the screen. Is there any reason that I can't change it? It's not working? One second. I'm with Climate Depot website, and we have the film Climate Hustle, which we actually premiered at the 2005, it doesn't work up there, is it? At the 2005 United Nations Paris conference. And we packed the theater with that, and we have a sequel coming out, which I'll talk a little bit about that coming up here in a minute. And I also have a book coming out, but we're going to go through some of what's happening in the United States today, talking about President Donald Trump and our climate debate, and then as it relates to the United Nations. The U.S. has joined, by withdrawing from the UN climate agreement, the international media is outraged, there we go, thank you, is outraged that we were in the company of Nicaragua and Syria as the only three countries that had not joined in on the UN climate Paris agreement. Well, they pressured Nicaragua to join, and just this past week, in perfect timing with the United Nations conference here in Bonn, they pressured Syria to join. You'd love to know what kind of backroom dealing was going on to get Syria to sign on. So now they have what they think is the ultimate talking point, which is that the United States now stands alone in rejecting the United Nations, what I call medieval witchcraft treaty, that we can control the Earth's temperature. And to that, I say, yes, we stand alone. And here's how we celebrate. This is it. Champagne glasses. This is true leadership. I was on Al Jazeera TV when Trump pulled out of the Paris Agreement, and they were saying, how could he do this? How could he let down the United Nations, let down his allies? And I'm like, and my answer was simple. This is true leadership, standing alone when the world, when political correctness, when all the pressure's on you, you still make the decision to keep your campaign promises and keep what makes sane, logical sense, both on policy, economic, and climate sense. Donald Trump's management and budget director has actually come out and declared that funding for global warming programs is, quote, a waste of your money. Now, this is a huge change here in Washington to have a presidential administration call climate funding a, quote, waste of your money. Donald Trump himself has said he's not a big believer in global warming. Donald Trump is trying to keep every one of his campaign promises, particularly when it comes to the climate. He has a proposed budget to significantly slash the climate industrial complex in the United States, from funding from the EPA to NASA funding on climate, and he wants to completely wipe out President Obama's legacy. The problem in the United States when you get into politics is, of course, he has to deal with Democrats in Congress and the Senate, and we're going to have midterm elections in the next year. And that's going to be a big battle in terms of what kind of shift occurs. But it's also battling his own Republican Party. Republicans can get very timid and afraid when it comes to climate or appearing against the environment. So Trump is meeting up with what we'd call the swamp in Washington. A lot of resistance he's meeting up with. He's pulled us out of the pact. He's reversed Obama's agenda. And it's going very well. Noam Chomsky, the intellectual, right after President Trump won the election, said the Republican Party has become the most dangerous organization in world history for rejecting the climate change claims and rejecting the United Nations. That is one of the greatest praises that we could ever have sung upon President Trump, the Republican Party, and any climate skeptic anywhere. When your opponents accuse you of being the most dangerous organization in world history, then you know you've accomplished something, and you know you're showing true leadership. Again, the champagne glasses. Okay. Just a little bit about myself. I'm called a media manipulator. I've got to debate Bill Nye several times on TV. Even the New York Times acknowledged that I, quote, pretty much chewed up Bill Nye, the science guy. Bill Nye actually has such an ego that he just came out this past about 10 days ago and said he blames himself for allowing skepticism in the United States to pull us out of the UN agreement and to stop EPA regulations. Bill Nye actually believes that he failed, that he had the power to stop all of this. Bill Nye is very influential in the United States because from about 1990 on, he has educated children from age kindergarten, first grade, all the way through at least high school. They've grown in public schools across America. Bill Nye is shown daily his old shows on science. He has huge respect. He has a celebrity following among young people, and he really does use that to impose global warming alarmism. What kind of intimidation? This was in Paris when we did our movie premiere. This was the day of the movie premiere for Climate Hustle in the Paris. They had wanted posters of me around the country for being a, quote, climate criminal, unquote. This is how they tolerate debate. One of my favorite accolades or praise I've gotten was I was called an a-hole on live BBC TV by the ClimateGate professor, Andrew Watson of the University of East Anglia. So I'm going to talk briefly about the science and have a little bit of fun here. People always say it's about the science. Bill Nye says this. President Obama, our former Secretary of State John Kerry, always said it's the science that matters. It's the science. Well, Connie Hedegaard, who actually went on a trip to Greenland with in 2007, she led the delegation. I was part of the U.S. Senate delegation that went. Said that if the science were wrong, we're still doing the right thing by policy. So they openly admit they don't actually care whether we're facing a climate crisis or whether their science is even correct. They just care that they're using that science to go after the certain policy prescriptions that they want. They would do the same thing whether we face the climate catastrophe or not. UN official Otto von Edenhofer said, we will redistribute the world's wealth by climate policy. Now, he was is currently an IPCC official. We want us to free themselves from the illusion that international climate policy is environmental policy. It has almost nothing to do with environmental policy. This is about the United Nations bureaucrats being empowered. We already know that they're using a climate scare to get their solutions. In the United States, actually this is Canada, she's a Canadian author. Naomi Klein is releasing books. She's on TV all the time in America. Capitalism versus the climate. And she's declared that a capitalism and free markets and living free without centralized planning is, quote, irreconcilable with a living climate, incompatible with a living climate. And we require a completely different economic system. So you're getting the idea here of the agenda behind climate and why President Trump is being so vilified. In the United States, we had a whole series of hurricanes this year after 12 years of record low hurricanes. This did not stop activists from immediately saying that carbon dioxide, a trace essential gas in the atmosphere, had, quote, poisoned the weather, unquote. We now live fossil-fueled tornadoes. Houston floods are a fossil-fueled poisoned weather. Whether we get record snow now in the United States, we had to say, bundle up, it's global warming. In Syria, this is a lot of fun because in drought, they're now saying that the Syrian civil war, the rise of ISIS, was all caused by the drought by man-made global warming. And therefore, we face more wars ahead and conflict. In 1933, the Syrian government banned yo-yos because they thought that they caused drought, the Muslim government there. Well, and now in 2017, they're trying to ban our automobiles and SUVs. Yo-yos are trying to ban our automobiles and SUVs because they think they cause drought. We really have not advanced scientifically. And I'll give you some more specifics here. This is a lot of fun here. 2015 Harvard study, climate change means days are getting longer and it's slowing the Earth's rotation. But go back 2007, global warming will reduce the length of the day and make the Earth spin faster. Climate change means less snow. We've all seen this one from 2000. But climate change can also mean more snow. Climate change makes wet places wetter and dry places drier, except when it makes wet places drier, an unusual drought in Thailand. And dry places wetter. South Carolina flooding is the type of event they've warned about. Climate change causes Antarctica to lose land ice, and it causes Antarctica to gain land ice. Are you getting a pattern here? Not only is the science irrelevant, but they predicted opposite ends on just about every major issue. So whatever happens, they say they won and they predicted it. Imagine if you bet on sports that way, predict both teams will win, and hey, you're a hero every time and you're making money. In their world, whatever happens, they predicted it. Climate change makes for saltier seas. Climate change makes for less salty seas. They can't make up their mind. Climate change increases the spread of malaria, except when it decreases the spread of malaria. These are all based on peer-reviewed studies, and these are the media accounts at the time of these studies. Dengue outbreaks will increase with climate change. Then a year later, climate change could decrease dengue plague. They can't make up their mind. But again, no matter what happens, they predicted it. They were right on target, and the media goes with this, particularly when we had record snows in the United States. Actually, it was George Monbiot in the UK, one of the ones who said, global warming actually means more snow, even though we said it meant less snow because we missed this study. And he found some obscure study from the late 1990s predicting global warming would mean less snow. And he went around and paraded, George Monbiot went around and paraded this around as though he was the savior of the movement. Look, we predicted it. We were right. Don't worry. And this is how they do it. They predict both ends. Climate change causes less rain in a warmer world, eternal nature, but it causes more rain and less water. The irony of global warming, more rain, less water, whatever that even means. Climate change causes more hurricanes, except when climate change causes less hurricanes. They originally said it was going to be category 4 and 5 hurricanes hitting all the time. Then they said it means fewer but more powerful hurricanes. Climate change threatens Norway's moose. This was 2008. The popular Norwegian moose faces the threat of global warming. Higher temperatures upset their food supplies. And here, I love this one. We're not in any doubt the moose is vulnerable to climate change. Okay, so let's accept that, 2008. Now, jump back 2 years, though. The problem is the moose is being blamed for climate change. The moose have burping moose. Norway's burping moose is more destructive to the environment than cars. It's harming the climate through its belching and farting. That's an actual quote from the article. So did you get that? Norway's moose is threatened by climate change, but it's also causing climate change. It sounds like the problem of the moose will resolve itself. It's either if we get rid of the moose, there'll be no global warming, and if we get rid of global warming, there'll be no moose. You can't, this is how the logic, and it continues. Global warming causes more crime. This is the Los Angeles Times in the United States. Climate change brings more crime. Okay, and it's going to cause a major crime as the century progresses. We've had UN lead author scientists do studies claiming that rape, vehicle thefts, barroom brawls, all of this is going to increase. But here's the catch. Now this is the LA Times, the Washington Post saying global warming causes more crimes. This is our climate debate in America. This is the extent of it. We can have the major media debate each other. The New York Times claims lowering crime causes global warming. So wait a minute, if global warming causes more crime, that's bad. But if we can lower crime, you think that would be a good thing. But no, that would actually cause more global warming. This was actually in the August 3rd, 2016 New York Times, lowering crime contributes to global warming. And here, now the Three Stooges weren't in it. I added that part for comedic effect. But here's how the New York Times explains it. Prison inmates consume less energy than the average citizen. So fewer prisoners means they're out in the outside world, which means their overall energy consumption goes up. The money saved from reducing crime can be spent in other ways. Infrastructure, buildings, goods requires more energy. In other words, the more people you can lock in prison, the more earth-friendly you're being, and you can lower their carbon footprint. Now we know what the UN has been up to. They're trying to incarcerate the entire global population. But let's go back. LA Times, global warming causes more crime. Lower crime causes more global warming than New York Times. We have a climate debate in the United States, I'm happy to say. So global warming causes more crime, reducing crime causes more global warming. Here's the kicker. If you disagree with any of that, you are a climate denier and belong in jail. Whereas your carbon footprint will reduce and you'll lower global warming. Who says you should go to jail? Bill Nye, the science guy. I actually interviewed him in Central Park last year in New York City. He entertained the idea of jailing climate skeptics for affecting the quality of his life. That was his exact quote. And I actually said, what about the intimidation factors? Scientists who can't speak up, who lose funding, who lose their jobs at university. And he said that that is a good thing, that climate-denying scientists are intimidated and silenced because they should be. That's what he said in the interview. Monty Python, Eric Idle from Monty Python, climate skeptics should be put on trial for crimes against humanity. I put this in because it's not just the leaders of the movement saying this. Hollywood, celebrities, and comedians, it's infiltrated our pop culture. Paul McCartney's gotten involved in the whole climate debate. Getting involved, and this is now, you have a Monty Python character, no joke, actually saying this. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., jail skeptics. Do I think they should be in jail, referring to climate deniers? I think they should be enjoying 3 hot meals and a bed or a cot at The Hague with all the other war criminals. This is the leader of the environmental community. He was a lead speaker at the climate march in New York City in 2016. Now, I took a cardboard cutout, life-size, to last year's United Nations Climate Summit. This was in Morocco. And you would think that the United Nations delegates, they reacted to a Donald Trump cardboard cutout the way vampires react to a cross. I was immediately swarmed by all the media tent representatives. International media gathered around, climate activists. They immediately called United Nations security, and moments later, about 2 minutes later, armed United Nations security, Craig Rucker and I, we were escorted out of the conference. This is their idea. Now, people were doing these kind of things all week. We were thrown out into the desert, and we had to wander the desert without any, literally out in the desert in Morocco. They put us outside the compound, and we had to walk. And then shortly after, more armed United Nations climate guards came over, confiscated my briefcase, took out papers, which I've never received back. We were given no choice. This was even outside the conference, and they were working in conjunction with the Moroccan government, which is a Muslim monarchy. So you see, there wasn't much democracy. You had United Nations armed climate cops in conjunction with the monarchy government of Morocco, and this is what they ended up doing. This ended up making a loop on CNN, international news, of me shredding the United Nations Paris document next to Donald Trump and the United Nations security sweeping us out of the building in swift fashion. I see Christopher Monkton here. He's had similar, without getting into any details right now, similar run-ins with the United Nations and at previous UN conferences. So you might think you're so tired of the global warming debate, you just want it all over, that this is you're tired of all the nonsense, of all the United Nations claims, of all the debate. You think, finally when I die, this will be all over, but you're wrong, because global warming is even impacting the dead. And in fact, after you die, Siberian corpses, we're being warned, are going to ooze previously sealed contagious viruses from the graves as they thaw. If you think when you die, you don't have to deal with global warming, not true. Climate change is causing mummies to turn to black ooze. And this is I believe it's in Argentina. Burial sites of mummies are experiencing higher humidity levels due to climate change. So we're literally, you can't escape global warming even beyond the grave. Finally, some good news, and this is actually fascinating because they're saying now global warming may have delayed the next ice age. Let's just stop all the other claims for a moment. Isn't that a good thing if that was the case? If our human emission of carbon dioxide had an impact, this would be the most likely impact it could possibly have in terms of the most benign impact, but they don't even talk about this, delayed the next ice age. So even if you are concerned about CO2 being a control knob or actually believe that for some reason, that would be a good development. Gore, President Gore, I had to mention his name a couple times here. He actually had his big sequel come out this summer in the United States. It came out in July. And this wasn't just a little documentary. This was Paramount Pictures in the United States, huge funding, thousands of theaters across the United States, mandated, had to carry Al Gore's film. The film's opening weekend bombed, 15th at the box office. I had to go see it because I did a review of it at Climate Depot. And it was on a Saturday night. There was about less than 10 other people or so in the theater. And these were big suburban mall multiplexes across America. By contract, were forced to carry his film. for several weeks. 15th was about as good as he did. He considerably dropped after that. It was so bad that Gore's fans actually were alleging that the film production company sabotaged Al Gore's film and did things to actually make it do badly, which would make no sense because Hollywood's always about the bottom line. One of the things I mentioned in the review was it was a great film to watch because even though you had to sit through all the droning of Al Gore and it had a series of footage of him training his young climate apostles, his trainees all across America, the movie had an unexpected and surprise happy ending. It actually ends with President Donald Trump pulling us out of the UN climate treaty and overturning EPA climate regulations. It was a stand up and cheer moment when you go see Al Gore's film because it actually shows Donald Trump undoing everything Al Gore's worked for. And it's just a great ending. Of course, Al Gore's fans would be horrified at that ending, but it was fantastic for skeptics to go see because you actually leave there with a sense of accomplishment, which is rare when you see an Al Gore film. We had, I mentioned, a series of hurricanes in the United States. This fueled a bunch more nonsense. This was The Nation magazine. To refuse to act, this is right after Hurricane Harvey, to refuse to act against global warming is murder. Climate denialism is literally killing us. This is from Mark Hertzegard, a climate activist. This is the new sentiment. Now, this kind of sentiment this is mainstream. This is on the pages of the New York Times, the Washington Post. It's premiered on PBS. I love this one from Pierre Gosselin from the No Trick Zone website, the inverse correlation, talking about hurricanes. Maybe we need more hurricanes. In other words, as CO2 has gone up, hurricanes, both landfalling hurricanes and major hurricanes have dropped. And you can see that going back to before 1900, not only is there no trend, it seems to be a reverse trend. And this is the kind of stuff that you can have fun with when you go on the media and show these kind of charts. The UN climate chief, she's now former, she just stepped down, she's now running a private organization, cashing in, praises China for doing it right on global warming. Quote, China's political system avoids some of the legislative hurdles seen in countries, including the US. What I'm looking at is a room not only of climate deniers, but you are a bunch of legislative hurdles to the United Nations. And this is it. If they don't like you, so they want to bully, intimidate, silence. They want to lock you up, but now they're even feeling bad about putting you in jail because actually they're not going to feel bad about putting you in jail because putting you in jail will actually lower global warming. So it's one of those things where they're going to have it no matter how they do it. She's calling for, this is a key quote so you understand the United Nations agenda as we stand here at Bonn. A, quote, centralized transformation that is taking place because they're going to listen to science. Now, they're using the climate scare for their solution. Centralized transformation. I spent a half a day with President Václav Klaus, former president of the Czech Republic, last year in Prague. He's going to be in the new film. We have the new film coming out, the sequel to Climate Hustle, which I'll talk about in a minute, but talking about the climate monarchy. And actually, that's going to feature Lord Monckton again, who's here in the audience, who talks eloquently about the history of monarchs and how the climate is essentially trying to impose a new climate monarchy, an unelected elite. The centralized transformation she's talking about is, quote, a very different transformation that's going to make life of everyone on planet Earth very different, unquote. This is the former UN, the United Nations chief, literally saying their goal is centralized transformation to make life on planet Earth very different for anyone because, quote, we have to listen to science. That, in a nutshell, is probably the single greatest quote to explain their whole agenda. They want to be in charge. They want it to be unelected United Nations bureaucrats, taking away the sovereignty of nations, deciding the energy economies, not only of the developed world, but the developing world. And that's where you get into immoral. In the film Climate Hustle, we actually feature Vice President Al Gore saying at a Bill Gates event that Africa's population is projected to be through the roof over the next 50 to 75 years, and that, quote, we need ubiquitous fertility management, unquote, because there are going to be too many Africans. You have a white, wealthy Western politician lamenting and upset that there's going to be projected to be too many people of color in the world, and therefore we need to essentially family fertility management to stop that. This is how they want to radically transform the world, and it's really scary stuff because most people think you're a conspiracy. I'm not a conspiracy. I'm quoting what they're saying. They want to make life very different for everyone on planet Earth. Now, some flashback. 1941, you thought, oh, we live in a crazy age. This is nuts. Well, actually, in 1941, we had a professor, I believe it was the University of Cincinnati, professor named Dr. Mills. He claimed global warming caused Hitler. Warmer temperatures, quote, may produce a trend toward dictatorial governments. People are more docile and easily led in warm weather. The rise to power of Hitler in Germany and Mussolini in Italy may be due in part to the gradually warming temperatures. And he goes on, this is University of Cincinnati. This was a major publication at the time. But wait, did global warming save Hitler? The heat forced a move of the key meeting during the assassination attempt by von Stauffenberg in 1944. They had to change the location because of the heat at the last minute. So essentially, they're saying the heat caused global warming, but the heat may have also saved Hitler. It caused Hitler and may have saved Hitler. This is just some of the stuff. You can go back in history. One of the websites that does a great job at this, who I hat tip for this, is Tony Heller at Real Climate Science. He has an amazing ability to go back, and I'm talking, he goes back to even early 18th century to find, one of the things he found was the Aborigines in Australia blamed the introduction of the white man on the continent with bad weather. And to me, I say the Aborigines, and it's about 1817, 1830, they're actually about as accurate today as blaming, our SUVs or coal use or just about anything else on changing the weather. So you go back, or it's just as accurate as, the banning yo-yos is going to affect the temperature or droughts in Syria, as they did in 1933. Carbon-based energy, coal, natural gas, oil, is the moral choice. Alex Epstein of the Center for Industrial Progress has been going around. He likes to say that, the moral choice of carbon dioxide. It is absolutely true that we live the nasty, brutish, short life until the introduction of carbon-based fuels, and it's allowed the 20th century and 21st century to have unparalleled growth in human achievement, and they're aiming directly at that. One final thing on energy here, well, we'll continue here, but the key thing on energy is solar and wind that everyone talks about. Bjorn Lomborg actually did a great analysis. I think it's only 0.6% of the global energy production, not even at 1% when you combine global and wind. And even under their optimistic scenarios, you might come out to a few percentage points. But one of the things the activists like to do is say, solar has quadrupled and quintupled and 10 times the previous 3 years. If you get a penny and you keep doubling it, it might seem impressive, but you're still talking a few cents. Not that I'm against solar or wind energy, because there's a lot of reasons you might be, but the bottom line is this: until you can go to a local Walmart or your local store and buy a solar panel, put it on your roof, and get off the grid and tell the gas and oil and coal companies that they can go to hell, is the day that you stop having this silly energy debate about banning energy that works for energy that may work. It's not ready for prime time, no matter how many subsidies you give it, but they keep pushing it. This is a great study here dealing with North Korea. It's always Earth hour in North Korea. It's the difference. This was actually a satellite photo from this is I think 2014, just showing how they, quote, centralized planning and centralized transformation the UN is always praising, and how, quote, China does it right when it comes to no democracy. That's how it looks. That's South Korea, and that's North Korea with the pitch blackness above it, just to show you the lack of development. And by the way, don't think it's been lost on environmentalists. They actually love the fact that North Korea, being so underdeveloped, has a lot more intact forests. One of the things they love is the DMZ zone, which they claim has hosting all these endangered species because it hasn't been developed. So there's actually environmental activists out there terrified that North Korea could ever fall and the country would be reunited because they think it would be an ecological, environmental crisis. The era of constant electricity is ending at home, the UK power chief said, 2011. Families have to get used to using power only when it's available. I just put in that one quote, because this is where when you come up with centralized planning and you come up with all these energy restrictions and you come up with banning energy that works, as the Obama administration was trying to do, as we've been seeing across the EU, and now it's infiltrating in the developing world. The World Bank is trying to prevent it, the United Nations. This is what happens. Even in the developed world, we're looking at rolling blackouts and all kinds of restrictions as they suck out the energy that works, carbon-based energy. There have been talks. Kevin Anderson, who's a professor in the Tyndale Center in the UK, he attends these UN conferences. I met him at, we had an impromptu debate in Poland at the Warsaw Climate Conference. He's proposed planned recessions in order to fight global warming. Well, why planned recessions? Because when you have a recession, emissions generally drop, and that's good for the planet. So they actually like that. They call it economic degrowth, and the Sierra Club has done it. At the Bill Gates functions across America, we have speakers that come and speak for 15 minutes. They actually talk about economic degrowth and how we need to lower economic growth in order to fight global warming. This is part of their plan. They don't think we should be allowed to live as we choose. So I end here by 21st century witchcraft. Acts of the UN, US, EU, they cannot control the climate or weather. It literally is the equivalent of 21st century witchcraft. Will Happer, who is one of the key people being considered to replace John Holdren as the United States science czar, who would have to be appointed by President Donald Trump, actually points out that not much has changed in the climate debate, that the judges during the Salem witch trials were all educated at Harvard University, and they condemned the women to their penalty in death in many cases. And he said not much has changed in the debate, because you still have the Harvard elite promoting this idea of witchcraft today. Instead of accusing witches of changing the weather like they used to, they're now accusing our cars, our vehicles, our appliances, our travel of changing it, yet they themselves aren't willing to change. The film Climate Hustle now is available widely. It's on iTunes, it's on Amazon, it's on all sorts of on-demand as well as DVD. As I mentioned, the sequel, Climate Monarchy, will be coming out in 2018. This was a lot of fun. You see in my hand, I met up with Al Gore in July in Australia. We did a movie screening of Climate Hustle in Australia. What's funny about this, and I don't think I can show it, but look at the lady's face. I'm presenting Al Gore with a copy of the DVD, and that's one of his aides next to him. Look at her face as she realizes I'm giving him the skeptical film Climate Hustle. It's in horror. Al Gore was all happy to shake my hand, but when he realized who I was and that I was giving him a copy of the film, which he refused to take, and immediately got swept off into his waiting SUV in the parking garage. But this is the extent. This is as close as any skeptic can get to Al Gore. Trying to give him a film, getting a horrific reaction from his aide. We tried. In February of this year, I want to announce that the Politically Incorrect Guide to Climate Change is coming out. It's my new book that basically summarizes the entire climate movement. I go back to the whole 19th century and talk about the CO2 greenhouse gas theory from its beginnings and some of the wacky things that the father of the greenhouse gas theory did. I go all the way through the entire climate debate, the history, tried to be comprehensive, virtual A to Z on all the climate issues. It'll be a reference guide. I believe it's going to clock in at almost 400 pages. It's the largest politically incorrect guide in the series that they've published. And it's not the kind of book you necessarily have to sit down and read from beginning to end. It's a reference book, almost encyclopedic. There's little breakout boxes, little snippets here and there. I go through the history of hurricanes. I go through the whole wacky climate claims back and forth in much greater detail. And we go through the whole Hollywood tipping points claims. A lot of fun with Prince Charles. By the way, one note on Prince Charles. He originally said we had a 100-month tipping point. And that was, I believe, 2008. And as that continued to count down, to his credit, we show this in Climate Hustle, he actually deducted the months. We have, 76 months. We have 50 months. When that came due last year, what do you think Prince Charles did? The tipping point passed. The deadline arrived. Prince Charles now has extended the tipping point to something like 2050. When I calculate, he'll be in his 90s. I can't remember the exact age. It's in the book, but he's like 93 or 94 years old. And with his genetics, given the Queen Mother is still living, and he may never get to be king at this point, he may actually make his new tipping point. But it just goes to show you that here's someone we actually give credit to in the film for being honest by picking a tipping point and then counting down, because no one else does that. But when time came at the end, he actually abandoned the tipping point and added about 4 more decades. So it was kind of disappointing. That's how you can reach me. That's my website. That's the website for the movie. ClimateDepot.com, Morano at ClimateDepot.com is my email.